Welcome, Wargamers, to a new kind of content, for me at least. And right up top, I want to ask for your help in making the channel better by asking for feedback on this format. You see, for the longest time, I've been covering lore for books that were already out, right? There were several when I started, or I was stopping to cover the newest release. But there's two problems with this, one, of course. First, once I cover a book, I rarely go back to it. And next, when there is a lull in Age of Sigmar releases, the well tends to run dry. And so I wanted to try something to give myself a reason, right, content-wise, to bust out these older battle tomes that I've already covered and go just a little bit deeper with them, looking specifically at what I call the timeless timeline of various armies, and essentially asking, why is this story so cool? Every battle tome has one of these timelines towards the beginning of it, and they're just these little narrative hooks to start showing you what this army is like as it interacts with the greater universe. We're going to talk about the forces involved, what it says about the combatants, what lasting impact this has on the mortal realms as a lore piece, and even how I would recreate this exact story using battle plans and battalions and armies and that kind of stuff. And so that's the intention, and your feedback would mean the world to me. Let's dig in. Diplomacy is a very messy thing. It's difficult to communicate and work with others to a mutually beneficial decision. And in that messiness, emergencies can turn into catastrophes, alliances get severed, and unforgivable acts can be put on for full display. These issues with diplomacy and the tangled web that it creates between factions is frankly why we play Warhammer and not Peacehammer, because frankly, war is much easier than trying to coordinate peace. But there's one specific instance of this that I want to highlight in today's lore exploration. See, I was reading my Maggotkin of Nurgle battle tome again, and in the timeline, I noticed this little blurb that stuck out to me in a way that I hadn't quite before. A small story called The Fastness Beset. Now I'm going to read it to you now. An immense horde of rotbringers, plague demons, slaves to darkness, and Nurgle-worshipping bray herds advanced upon the Greywater Fastness. Knowing the power of the city's super weapons, they began to systematically poison the lands around it, with filth pits and feculent gnarlmaws. As the forces of order counterattacked, a churning war zone developed. Now, to fully understand that story, we need to dissect it just a bit, because there's actually a lot in there. First off, let's set the scene. Grey Water Fastness is one of the founding cities of the Pantheon of Order. It's located in Ghyran, in what was once a thick forest, or at least an open field. These initial cities of order are really interesting to me, and you can always go watch my Cities of Sigmar series, and because they're all very unique and they're all very complex. They have to be able to balance the lives of so many different kinds of residents. You got humans, elves, dwarves, and so on, that kind of thing, and be some of the most best fortified locations in the realms, because the minute that Sigmar or Alariel draw the line in the sand, the forces of chaos are going to try and cross it. But Grey Water Fastness was established in the realm of life, mostly populated by dwarven, but all races can make an appearance. And the reason that this city is so important is because of what it manufactures. Guns. Guns, cannons, rockets, tanks, gunpowder, ammunition, and more. The leaders of these cities of Sigmar, when they were first kind of mapping out how they're going to retake the realms, figured out real quick, okay, well, if you want to retake that territory, it begins in a factory, right, where weapons of war are created in massive numbers. Grey Water Fastness is a place of industry, labor, and production. And while it's not, the only city that makes guns, of course you can write your own lore behind one, and all these other cities I'm sure produce weapons on some level, it's their bread and butter. And what makes them unique amongst the other major cities of order. It's a big deal and a vitally important location, and that's why this city matters so much. But the reason that this city is where it is was thanks to resources. Ghyran is a place full of resources like metal ore, wood, coal, various kinds of acids and water, and all those things are integral to weapon creation. The barrel, the stocks, acids for chemicals, wood and coal keep the forges hot. It's all right there. And so what happens when an incredibly important city with an immense, fortified structure and walls and all this kind of stuff drops itself into an active war zone as a wacky buffer between chaos and the other forces of order? And I say dropped in, I know it took time to build the city, but the War of Life has been raging around it for literally hundreds of years. The Nurgle versus Ghyran conflict predates Grey Water Fastness is what I'm saying. So this city was built right in the middle of all these things going on. And that is the place from our little, blurb. So let's talk about the aggressors. This incredibly formidable army of Nurgle, Rotbringers and demons and slaves to darkness and Nurgle beasts of chaos, are all still actively fighting the War of Life and then turn to face Greywater Fastness. It's a description of forces that we don't see a whole lot, and my assumption is that this is a truly massive army. But they chose to take the fight to Greywater Fastness in a very specific way. Normally when I see Beasts of Chaos in a lineup, I assume there's going to be a lot of run forward directly into gunfire and die, because quite frankly that's what Beasts of Chaos do best. Much could be said for many Slaves to Darkness units, as they're constantly trying to curry favor with the Dark Gods and their champions, as far as being hyper aggressive and not really thinking much, but this army was clever. They understood the weapons that lied within the Greywater Fastness, and so they kind of more went for a scorched earth approach, right? Poisoning the land and its rivers. Basically all the resources that I said before, well, now they're either unavailable due to contamination, or you literally can't get them because you can't leave the city safely. And so this kicks off a very traditional siege. We'll wait them out, the diseases will work their way into the city because someone, won't wash their hands or whatever, and then it'll be in there and they'll rot from the inside out. Now, what I like here is the vagueness of that last line. As the forces of order counterattacked, a churning war zone developed, very open-ended. However, we actually know what happened because it was later recorded in the Cities of Sigmar book, and I'll go ahead and read that now. During these seasons of war, the fortress city's iron-weld gun batteries and the luminarch arrays of the Collegiate Arcane decimated the bestial hordes that threatened to tear the city down. But the cataclysm they unleashed rendered the land around the city all but inhabitable. This region, known as the Ghoul Mere, is populated by vengeful woodland spirits who prey upon any mortals foolish enough to stray from the heavily guarded trade roads. Led by the mysterious tree lord known as Pale Oak, the Sylvaneth that dwell here have clashed several times with the armies of Greywater. Only the threat of undead invaders and rampaging warbands of chaos has prevented the outbreak of total war between these two seemingly incompatible cultures. Now, of course, it is possible that this refers to a separate event, but the fact that it includes Beasts of Chaos, which were specifically mentioned in the Nurgle one, I think this is really the only, and the fact that it's really the only major event that Greywater Fastness has, I think it's very reasonable to link the two. So, here's what I think happened, right? Tinfoil hat time. Nurgle forces begin the siege of the city by essentially isolating it with disease. There's no supplies coming in or out. The people within Greywater Fastness immediately saw this and were like, not today, and they sent out a counterattack to push the plague armies back. Seeing their prey out in the open for the first time, the Beasts of Chaos couldn't contain themselves and ran forward, possibly against orders, right? It's sort of a cascading effect like Leroy Jenkins style where, one party of your group rushes in, and now if the rest of the Nurgle army stays still, they just lose the Beast of Chaos because they're all dead. So, instead, you get pulled in and everybody rushes forward. By pulling the Nurgle army in, Greywater Fastness could finally unleash their cannons, and unleash them they did. And while that little link between these two stories is admittedly an educated conjecture, what happened next is fact. The sheer unbridled intensity of cannon and gunfire set loose by the forces of order was mind-blowing. Overlapping fire, rapid reloads, darn near limitless ammunition. They're producing it right there, and obviously it would have a limit if they spent it all, but they got a lot. You got cannons, you got rocket batteries and mortars, all got the fire at will order. And where Greywater Fastness was once nestled, in the booming and blooming life of Ghyran, it's now surrounded by utter desolation. So much gunfire went off that it simply deleted the land around it. For the city is now an island in a region known as the Ghoul Mere. And the reason I started this video off by talking about diplomacy was the aftermath of this. The Nurgle forces were pushed back. Yes, absolutely. Like the good guys won. That's awesome. But the land had been corrupted nonetheless. And shelling it with all this gunfire simply churned the earth rather than purifying it. And so now it's this big dead zone of rocky blast craters and uninhabitable lands, but it's also in the realm of life. And yes, victory was had that day, but at a severe cost, because not only were the natural resources immediately around Greywater Fastness just obliterated, but already burdened tension with the Sylvaneth locally reached a fever pitch. These two forces of order, the cities of Sigmar and Sylvaneth, came into open conflict multiple times over things like this. There are stories in both books about how the keepers of the woods and the forest hold those lands sacred, and the expansion and the use of materials of mankind specifically, they're incompatible. From the Sylvaneth point of view, how is making a dead zone of craters and fire any better than what Nurgle was doing? Like, it's not great. You know what I mean? Like, you can understand that, okay, this guy is supposedly my ally. He's better than Nurgle in the sense that he's not a corrupting evil chaos presence, but also if you annihilate the forests anyway, what have I gained as an ally? Nothing. And so even though this whole thing started with a Nurgle force rocking up to a city, the actions of the participants set Greywater Fastness on a course where diplomacy and the ability to function with its own grand alliance becomes extremely difficult. Every day in the mortal realms, decisions like this are made. We have to purge chaos at all cost. Well, that sounds great until we see what the, quote, all costs means. Because if you destroy the very thing you set out to protect, what's the point of any of it? I like this story. It's short, it lines up two huge forces, and later directly ties into some of the most fundamental lore behind Greywater Fastness. Why they are the way they are, meaning the literal geographic changes that's been around there, and explain the tensions with other, order forces. And I think that's one thing I want to see more of. I want to see more tension between factions, even if they're both on the same Grand Alliance. And so one thing I wanted to tack here at the end is, if I wanted to recreate this epic battle, how would I do so? Well, some things are easy. They tell you straight up it's set in Ghyran. The Cities of Sigmar player should obviously take Greywater Fastness. You don't have to stick exclusively to units with cannons or guns, but certainly some would be recommended to kind of get that flavor and that feel. Now on the other side, you can go kind of wild as the Nurgle player. Heck, you can go Beasts of Chaos or Slaves to Darkness as well. I wouldn't try too hard to fit a bit of every one of those sub-factions into an army. It kind of sounds like it would just be awkward. Certainly feel free to make your own Grand Alliance Chaos Force and do whatever. I just mean you still want it to be a good functional army. You're still going to be playing a game with it, so kind of keep that in mind. One thing that I would suggest, no matter what alliance you take, like what actual, faction you're sticking to, give yourself a free Gnarlmaw, because Nurgle gets a free Gnarlmaw, and you're trying to represent that army. So even if you take, a Beast of Chaos, whether you do the Nurgle stuff for the entire army or not, give yourself a Gnarlmaw to do some cool things with. And the reason I say that is because, remember, they were trying to poison the land before all hell broke loose. Before the city's army walks up, they're already poisoning the land with Gnarlmaws and toxins and that kind of thing. So let's talk about playing this out. So if I wanted to recreate this scene on the tabletop, how would I do it? The forces are fairly straightforward when we went those before, but what about the table and the battle plan? Well, if one of you is a Nurgle player, which hopefully you are, check out the battle plan located inside your battle tome. It's called Seeds of Corruption, and it's awesome. Basically, the defender, the non-Nurgle force, has most of the table, and there are 3 points on the map where the Maggotkin of Nurgle player needs to summon feculent Gnarlmaws. And whether he can or cannot is how the battle is determined. And I like it because it's simple, it's right there, it's printed in the book, ready to go. It fits right into the narrative. I think somewhat almost unintentionally, right? You got the Nurgle forces trying to push to poison the land, the defender coming out to shut down that poisoning, which seems to be the exact point at which all hell breaks loose in this story, when those two forces actually meet. Now, you can, of course, always go to the older GHBs, go to the open war generator stuff, and build this mission piece by piece. And you're going to see some of the other videos that I've done in this format as far as taking specific stories and bringing them to the tabletop. I did just that. But for this one, I truly feel like the Battletome mission is the core crux of what you're trying to replicate, where Nurgle's poisoning the ground, that's his thing, and then the defender, who it's his land that's being poisoned, is trying to stop him. Like, that is literally exactly what's happening. And so I think it's a fantastic mission. So I kind of paused when I was doing the open war stuff, and I was like, why? They already have a better one in the book. Let's just go with that. Be sure to theme your table and terrain as if they were whatever you envision that marsh to be like just outside the city before it was totally corrupted and blown to heck. So, you know what I mean? Could be open fields, could be forest, whatever you want to do. Just make sure there's some measure of try going into, like, we're just outside of a city. And friends, those are my thoughts on the Fastness Beset, as talking about the armies, the factions involved, and why they matter. And this is a pivotal moment for the Greywater Fastness. All these cities have moments where they've had to step up and, like I said before, draw a line in the sand. We're not going anywhere. This was their moment to do that, and they did it against a combined Nurgle army that sounds awesome. If you have a lore blurb that you want me to talk about in this style from your Battletome, let me know in the comments down below what the name of that story is. Like, this story was called The Fastness Beset. Let me know in the comments down below and which Battletome it's in, and we'll get around to it. Thank you all so much. Again, please leave me feedback for this. I crank these videos out in bulk, and so next week I'll be able to take that feedback and go forward with it. So thank you all so much for listening and watching. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.